There is nothing new under the sun. It's a statement commonly used to express that there isn't really such thing as a truly original idea, because at this point there have been a lot of humans who have had a lot of ideas. Also, the phrase comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, which makes it funnier because there has been lots of new shit under the sun since the Bible. The Nintendo DS was in fact a much newer idea than anything biblical writers could have imagined. The sentiment of the phrase is the important part for today's video. The Last of Us is a beloved franchise, and I want to make it clear what picture I am painting. I am not accusing it of being a ripoff of today's game. Trust me, I know ripoffs. I am also not making claims of something being better just by being first. I think there are very valid reasons people know The Last of Us more than this game, and we will break those down later. What I am simply saying is that today's game shares a remarkably similar soul to The Last of Us, and it deserves to have that highlighted. But first, what is The Last of Us? Pretend you don't already know for a sec. In essence, it's a linear third-person game set in a post-apocalyptic version of the United States, where a more experienced and world-weary dude has to safely escort a young and naive girl across the hostile remains of civilization. It has become far more than just its pieces, though. In much of the mainstream discussion surrounding it, what it represents is more significant than what it is. Many such discussions will declare, see, video games can be art, or see, video games can tell great stories. Personally, I think that's far too disdainful of the medium, since games had been telling interesting, deep stories for a long time before 2013, and implying decades worth of games isn't art is snooty gatekeeping hogwash. But I, at the least, understand the intention of the more well-meaning interlocutors making claims like this. The Last of Us is the kind of art and storytelling that even non-gamers can instantly recognize as extraordinarily well-crafted. If someone only knows movies or TV, they'll still recognize the cinematic aspects that work in the game's favor, strong performances and nuanced writing, to name two. It has themes and philosophies, and it asks the audience to grapple with and ponder over them. Perhaps because of this legacy, it's kind of amusing to look at as a franchise. It only has two truly original entries. Everything else is a remaster or a remake, and even granting that the TV adaptation does have new content, it's still first and foremost an adaptation, which will be further adapting the pre-existing content at some point down the road. I would be digressing, but emphasizing the success here is sort of the point, as this massive success is really the major difference between The Last of Us and today's game. I deliberately fine-tuned the in essence portion in the last paragraph so I could copy-paste it here. Today's game, in essence, is a linear third-person game set in a post-apocalyptic version of the United States where a more experienced and world-weary dude has to safely escort a young and naive girl across the hostile remains of civilization. It's cinematic in similar ways, with comparable performances and so much deliberate ambiguity-inducing nuance. It's gonna make you wrestle them themes. Enough beating around the bush. Today, we are talking about Anubis II. I lied. Today, we are talking about Enslaved, Odyssey to the West. It was developed by Ninja Theory, a company now best known for the divisive DMC Devil May Cry reboot game, and Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, amongst others, and released in 2010, 3 years before The Last of Us, on PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. It is a very loose retelling of the 16th century Chinese novel, Journey to the West. Full disclosure, I only have some tangential knowledge of that book, but I strongly suspect the developers weren't actually looking to replicate the Buddhist allegory from the original here, primarily just using the broad strokes and the character namesakes as a starting point. The whole thing is fairly soft sci-fi, bordering on science fantasy, and is set a couple hundred years after a war involving combat robots went poorly, exterminating most of the human population. So, at least from that angle, it also appears to have some overlap with Horizon Zero Dawn, but as I did not finish that game, I have no clue how deep that goes. It also has a rather noteworthy selection of cast and crew, several of whom actually carried over from Ninja Theory's previous project, Heavenly Sword, a game I have not yet played, but would be interested in covering someday here. So, you can add it to the list of games I have talking about without having yet talked about. There are 3 primary characters we see on screen the most. The first is Monkey, based on the Monkey King, played by Hollywood mocap expert Andy Serkis, whom general audiences will probably recognize best from roles like Gollum, being wasted by the MCU, being somewhat less wasted by The Batman, and most amusingly considering this role, Caesar from the new Planet of the Apes movies. Next is Tripitaka, or Trip for short, which was the title of the monk Tang Zanzang in some translations of the original novel. But here, he got adapted into a 19-year-old tech-savvy woman played by Lindsay Shaw, whom I know best from watching Ned's Declassified as a kid. Finally, Pigsy, played by Richard Ridings, whose long and varied career most humorously overlaps here with his role, Daddy Pig in Peppa Pig. I'm just going to assume that pig is less horny than this one. Penis. It was written by Alex Garland, a novelist and filmmaker who wrote such things as 28 Days Later, 2012's Dread, and Ex Machina, which he also directed. Legitimately impressive work, Alex. This game also has an exceptionally beautiful soundtrack composed by Knight and Sawney, and from what I could find, at least 2 art designers went on to do art design for The Last of Us Following, which is very appropriate. They had the correct resume for it. Enslaved is also pretty personally significant. I first played it a gobsmacking 13 years ago after picking it up alongside 3D Dot Game Heroes, a game that is otherwise irrelevant but would be great to talk about on here someday. To say that it made an impact on me would be an understatement. I first talked about the game in one of my older videos, 8 games that emotionally fucked me up. If you're familiar with Assassin's Creed, the ending to Revelations is a decent comparison, as that one also made that list. It has come up a few other smaller times on here too. The one that comes to mind is when I used Trip as a fake avatar to explain Assassin's Creed multiplayer modes. So, while I haven't talked about this one as much as some topics, this game was a very significant development for me in media literacy, and has been living in the back of my brain from a very formative age. This game was one of the first examples of ambiguity deliberately presented to get the audience deliberating in a work of fiction I'd consumed. In fact, you're going to hear me use the word ambiguous a lot this time around. Between Andy Serkis's high-level mocap actually allowing characters to emote through highly precise facial expressions and body language, and the game frequently taking the time to do sweeping landscape shots for both environmental storytelling and even gentle gameplay guidance, this game is more interested in showing us much of the story instead of telling us. This is not to say characters never explain anything, as they often will explain things within their expertise to each other, but it's deliberately limited. They don't know much of the broader picture, so we have to infer. Like on a sliding scale of storytelling, with Dark Souls at one end and Zork at the other, this game firmly lands at Enslaved, Odyssey to the... Fuck, this is not a useful chart. Our characters also don't have the answer to some very tough philosophical quandaries, and as such, the game has the maturity to simply present their choices, trusting the audience to come to a conclusion instead of dictating one at us. This should all sound very familiar to The Last of Us. I'll stay out of spoilers if you haven't played that one yet, but there's a late game scene where a character says one thing, but they're lying, and another character acknowledges the lie, and you're kind of supposed to interpret that they know it's a lie from nonverbal cues, and then you have to infer why they're going with the lie, when you're pretty damn sure they know. While Enslaved doesn't have this scene one-to-one anywhere, seeing as it is a different plot, it's this mentality of reading between the lines that's center stage here. That's enough of what's the same for the time. Enslaved is absolutely going for more of an adventure feel than the grounded horrors of Naughty Dog's later post-apoc. I suspect Ninja Theory changed Journey in the original novel's title to Odyssey here to evoke a similarity with the Greek story of that name too. The science fiction elements are mostly there to justify the function of the world. For example, in a world with explicit force fields and holograms at play, you can hand-wave away quite a few nitpicky quibbles that realism would invite under the vague notion of technology. Like, everyone would absolutely be dead of tetanus in this world otherwise. I think they made the right call. This also means the moment-to-moment gameplay is the most significant difference from The Last of Us. The last time I spoke about Enslaved, as a brief aside discussing the problem with Gotham Knights, I think I sold the gameplay a bit too short in comparison to the quality of the story, as I definitely respect how they handle the gameplay loop too. While you can still sometimes sneak around unaware enemies, Monkey absolutely has the means to fight back against the mechs in controlled situations. It's a fairly beginner-friendly combat system, but it fleshes out the options thoroughly enough to be fun and well implemented. Melee has light and heavy attacks, stuns for blocking enemies, a dedicated block for yourself which you can counter out of with an upgrade and some good timing. as well as a move to clear some space around yourself. High damage focus attacks you build up to and can store to use at your discretion, and in some cases enemies will have an intrinsic flaw where, if you can damage them enough without outright defeating them, you can do a takedown and turn them into an improvised explosive to either stun or destroy any robots grouped up within a close range. Sometimes you'll get a slow motion takedown of Monkey's staff bisecting mechs with a spray of oil, and takedowns on special enemies see the likes of ripping their arms out through their shoulders, or turning their own Gatling guns right back at them and opening fire. It's straight badass, but it still hits the right balance of justifying how Monkey has been able to survive in this harsh world without tipping over into undoing how much of a threat the warbots are. Several bigger, deadlier threats limit what you can do against them the first time one arises, and these avenues only pop up once the characters have had a chance to scan and study them. Outside of melee combat, there are some ranged attacks available anytime you have the ammo through Monkey's Techno Staff, which can shoot explosive or stunning bolts, as well as situational guns which are either mounted in place or can be stolen from enemies. The third-person shooting bits are fine enough, but definitely aren't the tightest aiming and shooting mechanics you'll come across. Ammo is pretty typically limited for your staff, so you have to be a little bit strategic, but it also gives bigger opportunities. With more ammo and lots of cover, Monkey will automatically crouch behind, so the game also gives you the chance to let loose sometimes. Both melee and ranged combat have an upgrade system in which you gain tech points from the environment and defeating enemies to beef up your health, damage, shields, and some of those more advanced combat moves. All of the footage here is pretty high level stuff, since this is the save file I've been replaying the game on for more than a decade now. I rarely had to use healing options. I was cutting through boss fights like butter. The enemies lighting up like Joseph's goddamn Technicolor Dreamcoat? That's an upgrade to visually show off what state each enemy is in. Interestingly, this game is very much not designed to just let you upgrade everything at once, like you're seeing here. If you want high-level stats in an area in your first playthrough, you will have to focus on that at the expense of other skill categories. I'm genuinely not even sure how many times I've played through this game, since it's been a few years since I last played, but it's likely in the range of 5 or 6 plus some random extra chapter select replays, and I still fell short of the final upgrade I had available by a few points when I hit the last opportunity to upgrade in this playthrough. So if you're genuinely here to experience everything the combat system has to offer, you're not getting it for a while, and it is simple enough that it would probably lose some appeal if I weren't spacing these playthroughs across multiple years. In the game's defense though, Enslaved is great at keeping gameplay varied and novel throughout its entire runtime. It's not just combat after combat. It truly mixes up what you are doing at most times. Puzzles and navigation and sightseeing are constantly swapping around with each other in the mix. Most of the other gameplay mechanics are centered around interacting with Trip in this pseudo-co-op with the AI. And she is genuinely one of the best AI gaming companions I've seen, right on par with S-tier choices like Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite, or any of the supporting characters Naughty Dog has included across The Last of Us or Uncharted. She typically has the general options to heal you if she is nearby, throw up a decoy hologram to get a turret off your back, and even the upgrades are done through her, and you can tell her to move when you deem things to be safe. Some puzzles will situationally add in controls where she is operating machinery you can ask her to activate too. On your end of things, there's a dedicated Hey button.
Hey! 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 Hey!
This is obviously how you distract turrets to let her move. It's a very equal exchange in this case. You can also pick her up and carry her at a moment's notice for various purposes, most commonly to throw her somewhere she cannot reach on her own. There will also be times when you lift something up, and she goes under, and then you follow suit, with the game closing the path behind you. This should be very familiar to fans of Naughty Dog's games. As Trip is smaller and less experienced than Monkey, you do sometimes have to defend her from mechs or help pull her up from not quite nailing a landing. But these are done in controlled bursts, and she never gets to be burdensome. In fact, when the game has deliberately separated you, you do very quickly notice her absence and the lack of her capabilities. This is going to tie into some of them themes we'll be discussing in the plot. The game's weakest element is the climbing mechanic. It bears some resemblance to the already simple climbing from something like Uncharted, and manages to simplify it further from there. It's genuinely just jumping or dropping from preset points to the next one, with very little else to it. Technically, there's a little nuance where you can jump while Monkey swings on a horizontal bar to get him to the next point faster than letting him swing all the way onto it, but the game rarely even requires you to do that. There won't be any wrong directions to go in while climbing, and just jumping naturally in the world will never let you jump if there's not already a safe place for you to jump across to. Towards the end, the only challenge they present is waiting for obstacles like fire or barriers to stop existing over the climb points, but if I messed up the timing, my high-level health would absorb whatever minor damage they caused because of just how quickly you can spam your jumping through these. There's not really even the puzzle of figuring out where to go next, since the points you climb all glimmer at you. It's definitely not the worst climbing system I've ever seen. I distinctly remember liking the one from Captain America's Super Soldier even less, and maybe I should talk about that game on here sometime. Oh, for fuck's sake. Much better implemented is a system for using the cloud. See, the Monkey King could ride around on a cloud in the source material, so here he has a tech force fieldy hoverboard thing he can zoop around on in designated areas by clicking the right stick. This feels great in motion. It's very natural to control and zigzag between or over objects, picking up boosts as you go, and I would love having this in an open world game. It is just so much fun. Overall, this game does an amazing job juggling different emotional beats. In the same way it keeps mixing around gameplay elements to keep it from feeling too samey, it does a good job with various tones so you don't get too overwhelmed by just one taking over the plot. There are emotional highs and moments of elation, which allow the emotional lows and the more tragic elements to hit harder. Stakes always feel significant and serious, but it allows you to breathe between them with a great sense of humor.
So, Monkey, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You use a lot of hair product.
What?
My favorite joke on this replay was one that has only gotten better with time.
What is all this stuff?
Just some ancient redundant technology.
That ancient, redundant technology is a stack of 3D TVs. Back then, corporations were pushing so hard to make these a big thing that several games, including this one, touted 3D TV functionality as a big feature. Perhaps you are aware, but 14 years later, 3D TVs, aren't that. Kudos to whoever wrote that gag. This is also just a very visually striking game. It uses color well and has a unique sense of style where everyone and everything do feel like distinct parts of a cohesive whole. Even with the generation's hardware limitations, especially the jaggedness games of the day often had, it doesn't really undo the charms of the game, since pretty with some roughness fit in well with the themes. Nowadays, playing this game on aging hardware does admittedly run a little choppier than before. I'd wager the Steam version on a modern computer is probably going to give you the best possible experience, but full disclosure, I have not tested that to know for sure. It's also a mostly seamless diegetic interface, with HUD and certain visual elements being justified as the functions of the headband tapped into Monkey's brain. Technically, the placement around the corners of the screen do break the fourth wall a little bit, as he would actually be seeing them from his perspective, and those goddamn handholds are glimmering even before he gets the headband activated, so it doesn't quite get to the level of Dead Space's everything's diegetic immersion mentality, or even just to Assassin's Creed's level of justifying similar elements slightly more thoroughly through the concept of the animus. But it's still nice to see a game going through the effort to explain the bits and bobs that usually get overlooked. This effort even gets used to justify level design. The closest the game ever gets to being video game puzzly involves a series of lowering and raising bridges, but the characters talk about the dudes specifically designing them to stump the less capable problem solving of the mechs, and when it starts to get really elaborate, the characters are even like, Jesus fuck, this dude and his damn bridges. Random little thing, wasn't really sure where else to put it, but I know it's going to come up. While this game is somewhat guilty of the trend of having its female character, a bit underdressed, it puts its money where its mouth is and has the male character also rather skimpily dressed too. So it is, at least, equal opportunity exposure. I also might just be too bisexual for an unbiased opinion on this. Before we get into the plot, I think it's time we try and address this. Since Enslaved was a few years ahead of the curve, doing several things The Last of Us would later be praised for, why wasn't this one a major hit too? Namco Bandai, the publisher, had hoped to sell more than 1 million copies, but the latest number that they released, at least that I could find, was around 730,000 sales, and that was after an entire year. The real answer is probably boring stuff. Release timing and marketing and that kind of thing. When Naughty Dog made The Last of Us, they were already a highly acclaimed studio for several gaming generations and had just blown away the entire medium with Uncharted 2, a game other devs still look to as an influence on their action. When Ninja Theory made Enslaved, they had only made 2 games, and one of those was Kung Fu Chaos. I admittedly know nothing about Kung Fu Chaos, it just sounds like a funny punchline for the record. It also has the kind of title that likely raises a few eyebrows in concern. Yes, it's a justified title, as the titular enslavement deliberately paints the rest of the game in a more sour light, and putting it front and center really re-emphasizes the point that you are supposed to interpret everything from that starting point. However, without context, it's just slapping unsuspecting bystanders in the face with one of the most morally dour subjects in human history. So I could see how that might also not help sales. Hell, I myself left the title out of my titles, suspicious that YouTube's algorithms would just immediately nuke it from orbit. And who knows, maybe I've said it too many times and they've caught up to me anyway. Please like and comment and subscribe and bell icon and share so the engagement helps counter the kind of censorship begotten from corporations getting squirrely about the exchange of ideas because a pragmatic, negative word got involved in said exchange. Even setting the real-world implications aside, The Last of Us does still have a few advantages. It's certainly more polished. Being right at the end of its console generation under a more experienced development team meant that they had truly every opportunity to run the system to its peak capabilities. Likewise, The Last of Us is a little bit better able to mask its gamey aspects a little bit more, and that just makes it more immersive. Sure, sometimes you're taping some scissors to a machete to somehow fix it up, and you can just tape up a bullet hole on the fly, but the more grounded nature of that work makes it easier for the audience to relate to what's happening. I have never punched a robot that could fight back, and even explaining that the orbs are just HUD elements highlighting useful little bits of sci-fi doodads that can then be used to spruce up other sci-fi doodads. I don't have any real-life context for these doodads, so it's functionally no different than picking up generic video game orbs in God of War or Altair's Chronicles. Finally, The Last of Us is better because it is less fun to play. That sounds counterintuitive. Let me explain. The Last of Us's gameplay loop is brutal and stressful, and the most positive feeling after a typical encounter is relief that you bashed in their skulls before they could do the same to you. The unpleasantness reinforces the point. The violence is out of desperation in the face of humanity's inhumanity, and nature's uncaring hostility, and it's not supposed to be fun or easy. Enslaved has to switch gears between, oh what sorrows have been wrought, and shit yeah, I'ma explode you motherfucking glorified toasters, on at least some level when combat breaks out. There are pros and cons to both approaches, sure. I have played The Last of Us through exactly once, and Enslaved more than that. So that's one point for the latter approach. But the former has placed its game in the kind of critical and commercial acclaim that will have the game brought up as a highlight in the medium's history for so long as humanity manages to keep discussing video games before the day we all go extinct and the universe keeps moving fundamentally unchanged without us. So that's one point for the former approach. Ludonarrative congruence is a hell of a drug, turns out. Story time. As there is a lot of ambiguity or cases where details get sprinkled in later in dialogue or the environment, I'll do a little bit of streamlining discussing certain things here, but it's not nearly as much as I had to do for Layers of Fear, which I discussed for Christmas for reasons that definitely make sense. We open up with Monkey awakening in a slaver's containment cell aboard a slaver's flying ship. These slavers, Pyramid, have been doing this for some time, through the means of both repurposed warbots and also slaves, and while they have gained quite the notoriety, nobody non-Pyramid really knows what the purpose is or where their victims are being taken. Fortunately, he sees a more technically capable woman break out of her cell, and in escaping, she inadvertently sets him free too, as well as causing the slowly snowballing complete and utter destruction of the entire airship. Amusingly, considering all this game owes to the earlier Uncharted games, there's just a little bit of coincidental overlap with Uncharted 3 and its airplane sequence, which released the following year. There's also a shot that uses the Statue of Liberty to establish location, very plausibly as a nod to the famous end scene of the original Planet of the Apes, which gets even more amusing since filming for Rise of the Planet of the Apes, with Andy Serkis aping it up, started as this game neared release. Back to the point though, Monkey keeps pursuing the woman through the airship, trying to get her attention, but she keeps fleeing and locking him away behind doors. He also tries to speak to one of the enslaved crew members who doesn't just get immediately exploded, cause nearly everyone else we see is stationed right at the explodiest points of the ship. But the compliance headband immediately tortures the man to death for what it deems as assisting an escapee. As Monkey clambers around the collapsing ship, stopping long enough to grab his gear, we hear the countdown of remaining escape pods. By the time he gets to the very last one, the woman is inside, and she launches it with him on the outside. He survives, probably because he has a personal force field, but when he comes to, the woman has placed a hacked headband on him, enslaving him. She wants to get home safely, and didn't think she'd be able to on her own. If she dies, the headband will kill Monkey. If Monkey doesn't obey an order, it will hurt. If he wanders off the beaten path too far from her, he starts to feel it. He has to get her home if he wants to be free. The act of owning another human being is broadly considered to be one of the absolute worst things you can do, at least among sensible people. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I kind of hate that we live in a world that necessitates having to keep saying it, but here we are. Slavery is a bad thing. It was such a bad thing in such recent history that just talking about a half-naked Andy Serkis slave in the robot post-apocalypse still risks me scaring off squeamish advertisers because they are cowards. The game knows it is bad. Every interaction, every moment of character development is shaped and colored by this act of coercion. Even more positive beats are tinged by the tiny little voice of doubt that all of this only came about by removing someone's ability to consent under threat of death. It's a subtle thing sometimes, but I know the developers intended it through coyly pointing us in that direction by making it the fucking title. The interesting thing is that it's not an immediate or total condemnation of Tripp. We're going to see plenty of times where she wouldn't have survived without help, so she genuinely was between a rock and a hard place. We don't know how long Monkey was out, but it was long enough to reprogram a headband to respond to her. A riskier but ethical option would have been waiting for him to wake and then asking for his help. She wouldn't know that he would have said yes, or even that he wouldn't just be a threat himself. We technically don't know either. It's ambiguous. And her only interaction with him was seeing him desperately chasing her down on the airship. It's plausible he would have said yes from what we do know. He's fairly solitary, but he does trade with communities, so he might have been willing to do it for compensation, if not out of the goodness of his heart. His first step probably would have been the same anyway. He's trapped in hostile territory overrun by mechs, so finding his motorcycle in the airship's wreckage had to happen anyway to escape. He later seems to be the kind of guy who would at least allow someone vulnerable to tag along for their sake, though again, it's ambiguous since we only see him behave that way under coercion. What this tells us about Tripp is that she is willing to take less ethical actions in the name of self-preservation. We technically may have seen this aboard the airship too. She disrupted the systems so she could get out and get away, essentially scuttling the entire thing. Did she know this would happen, or was she just in over her head? Either way, it led to the deaths of a lot of people. Not just the crew, who, mind you, are also enslaved. There are other pods holding kidnapped individuals. It never says the words, but right off the bat, we're contending with the notorious arguments of, I did what I had to do, or even the ends justifying the means. We're like 25 minutes into the game. I told you it would make you wrestle them themes. This is also subtly reflecting on the way gaming as a medium commonly commands the player around. There's some overlap with BioShock's similar themes, but it's much less blatant here, and thus, more the kind of thing you notice the longer you dwell on the game. So the two start working their way through a dangerous New York. We see signs from 200 years before protesting the war and protesting the mechs. It's unclear who the war was being fought against, but considering a later chapter takes place in the ruins of a mech factory, we can't even say for sure that it was even an outside threat that caused all of this. Tripp and Monkey do get to know each other better. Monkey lost his parents to mechs when he was so young that he doesn't even remember the name they gave him, so the communities he'd trade with just started calling him Monkey based on the way he clambers around. Presumably, this is even why he has a heavy but inconsistent New York accent. People just weren't sticking around long enough for him to pick up a consistent dialect. Trip is from her father's self-reliant wind farming community, so other than getting kidnapped by slavers, she has simply never been out in the world like this. Monkey also starts seeing glitchy images of a mask caused by the headband, and when he touches them, he gets several glimpses of the world before the war. These are neat, and I never thought twice about them back then, but now that I'm older and more familiar with his face, it technically means I got to notice an Andy Serkis jump scare. These early chapters truly do a great job at establishing just so much. This world was more advanced than ours, but it was not dissimilar. It feels like a world we could potentially be someday. There is a lot of beauty, like when the two stumble upon a tank of fish that have managed to survive as a closed ecosystem despite all odds. There is also a lot of tragedy, like when a wrecking mech fucking fists the fish to their doom. There are large, hulking predator mech dogs, but there are also quiet, tender moments where the characters appear to be learning to trust each other, including times where Trip doesn't order Monkey to do something, but rather gently asks. Likewise, Monkey begins carving out his own moments of autonomy, asking Trip to trust him so he can do something that will help them both. After a number of trials and tribulations, they get to the wreckage, and fortunately Monkey's motorcycle is still intact, and they are able to get out of the dangerous hub of the city. They drive for miles, seemingly undisturbed. Were the mechs primarily released in heavily populated areas, or did they simply migrate there, per faulty programming telling them to kill everyone? How deliberate was the near eradication of humanity? It's ambiguous. The last night of the trek, Trip awkwardly invites Monkey to stay in their community. You know, if he wants to. There's a few ways to read this. She could be feeling guilty for having done this to Monkey, trying to make amends. Or perhaps, getting closer to home and feeling safer than we have seen her yet, she could just be reverting back to the normal, awkward 19-year-old girl who was more isolated growing up and isn't used to getting to know new people. She's definitely growing to value Monkey as a friend instead of just as a slave. Is there maybe even a twinge of romantic attraction? Maybe. I don't know. The game doesn't tell us. I mean, there is from me, because good God, you could use that man's abs to slice cheddar or something. Yeah, that made very little sense once I actually said it. I am bad at flirting with men. Once they arrive, something's off. No one is manning the outposts or answering the walkie-talkies. Trip finds it a little odd, but is too naive to find it suspicious enough. Monkey, and most likely the player playing, however, have their alarm bells ringing. And yeah, it's as bad as the game wanted you to suspect. The community is overrun by mechs, and there are charred bodies everywhere. Trip starts to panic and declare it all lost, but Monkey shows an interesting turn here. Back in NYC, Monkey was openly cynical and clearly doubted the efficacy of the self-sustaining community, as demonstrated during the fish fisting, metaphorically. However, here he turns on a dime, immediately dropping the jaded edge to encourage her not to lose all hope. Where could survivors have holed up? This gets her focused, and lo and behold, the safest location is sealed, with locked up security doors proving that someone had to get inside to activate them. Hope is allowed to live in the embers a little bit longer. They reset the power to get in, only to find Trip's father dead. He recorded a goodbye message in his final moments for her, figuring she would be resourceful enough to make her way back. It's also unclear if he simply succumbed to his injuries from the mechs after sealing himself inside, or if lacking any other way to survive and knowing the dog out there would likely keep trying to get in so long as he lived, he decided to end things on his own accord, so to speak. Also, this MFer is clearly the engineer from Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. These two games came out the same year, and I spent hours compassing people in the back as him. You cannot fool me. Trip, despondent but collected, reneges on her promise to Monkey. She won't free him. She wants to find Pyramid and to kill them. My question to you, dear viewer, is this. Did Pyramid even cause this? You can build the argument two ways. The first, saying they did, begs the question of why everyone is simply dead instead of captured. Did they do it out of revenge, somehow discovering that Trip crashed one of their airships? It's not impossible, but it does seem less likely once we learn more about them later on. Were they trying to capture the villagers when things simply took a turn for the worse? Also not impossible, but since there's not a clear, organized effort to fight back, there's no obvious cause to lead to that outcome. On the flip side, perhaps this was merely a mech attack that Trip has mistaken to be under the control of Pyramid. It seems very unlikely that they are controlling all of the mechs across the former country. The trigger-happy nature of the robots flies in the face of bringing in people alive, after all. However, if the mechs were attacking on their own, they purportedly couldn't have gotten past the bridge system in place. It's plausible that they simply found another vulnerability elsewhere, but as we don't see that, we can only speculate. As they drive away, they have a conversation which just houses so much possible interpretation, which I will be calling back to later.
Monkey. You haven't said anything to me.
About what?
About how I broke our deal? To let you go?
Well, what do you expect me to say? You get home. You find your whole life wiped out. You want to hit back. I get it.
Everything is simple to you, isn't it?
It just is what it is.
Their next goal is finding a junker who is a friend of Trip's father, Pigsy, because he has the means to help them track Pyramid down. Pigsy is immediately willing to help Trip, but unfortunately, his goals do not seem to be so noble. Between the pinup art tattoos on his arms and the lipstick belt buckle, we can infer that Pigsy doesn't want to make love. Pigsy wants to pork. He is explicitly like that creepy dad's friend that starts getting into the technically adult daughter once she's old enough that it can't be legislated against. He is also quite juvenile and really rubs Monkey the wrong way. Pigsy suspects Monkey and Trip are playing reverse Jenga, if you will, which Monkey shoots down bluntly. The one time we get to see him respond so bluntly since he's not addressing the person who got him into all of this.
Trip enslaved me. And if I don't do what she says, she causes me a lot of pain. And if I still don't do what she says, she kills me.
That doesn't convince Pigsy though, but Trip clearly doesn't reciprocate back, so he keeps making little comments and boasts where it's like watching a high school boy trying to win over the girl he likes. Being relatively isolated in this hostile world has really emotionally stunted him. Pigsy takes everything too far when he sets Monkey up to get attacked by a massive rhino mech, going for a power cell they need. It backfires horribly when Trip gets dragged away on the mech. Monkey is able to sweep in and save her at the last second, and there is a shot of Pigsy watching from afar through his sniper scope. It's clear he has the intrusive thought to shoot Monkey, cause he chuckles. But he stops quickly, and his face falls. Did he feel guilty for considering a rather heinous action, or is he just crestfallen that he knows he won't be getting the girl? It's ambiguous, because from this point on, he's both less antagonistic to Monkey and less of a horndog towards Trip. Their goal for this second half of the game is to follow some pyramid ships to the location of a Leviathan, one of the largest war mechs out there, so they can steal it and come kicking in their teeth with the biggest boot possible. It's a bit of an uphill battle, and Pigsy gets some comeuppance stuck hanging upside down, tangled in his grappling hook's cable underneath a submarine being carted along towards the dam where the Leviathan is held. But they do prove victorious. Pigsy is elated driving the biggest and baddest machine possible, and Monkey and Trip have a scene that haunts me with interpretation. Trip, genuinely sorry for all she has put him through, deactivates the headband. Monkey shoots upright and softly but firmly tells her,
Turn it back on.
There is an undercurrent a lot of people read as romantic to this scene, not the least of which the developers incepted into the back of players' minds by having Pigsy interpreting their relationship as such, but in the context of the whole game, and where the ending is about to go, I genuinely don't think it's supposed to be interpreted so positively as that. By this point, I think Monkey has developed codependency more than anything else. We know he's never had strong connections of his own, prior to having this one forced upon him. He has watched the end point of too much isolation play out with Pigsy. Sure, he has had positive experiences and shared much empathy with Trip, but he never had the choice in that matter. She's tapped into his brain. Look at the difference between their motorcycle conversation and this one. There, he was resigned to his fate. It is what it is. Here, he is terrified of losing things being what they are. This is not a healthy relationship for Monkey. Don't get me wrong, I truly don't think Trip is deliberately manipulating him, but her timing here is great timing to keep him linked up like this. This is the first time in the game we see him truly relaxed. He's legitimately, finally at ease. He's reached acceptance for it is what it is. And what does Trip do as soon as he's comfortable with everything? She takes it away, yet again pushing that new status quo on him that he never asked for. The Monkey from the start of the game probably would not have ever allowed her to enslave him now, but that version of Monkey did not get the chance to decide for himself. He's no longer that version of himself, and he won't ever be again. She wasn't trying to change him, but he was under threat of death. There was no way he wasn't going to change. Intentions can't justify that outcome. This scene also speaks to Tripp inherently being self-centered to a bit of a fault. In the same way she enslaved him because it was convenient, she only tried to do the right thing and free him now when it is again convenient. He was her means of getting revenge, but now that the Leviathan is her new means of getting revenge, she allows herself to consider him as a person more so than a tool. I'm sure she had grappled with the dilemma of objectifying Monkey as this means to these ends. Even when he wasn't getting attacked by murderous blenders, everything she had asked him to do risked him getting crushed in moving machinery, or falling to his death, or getting poisoned by toxic waste. Feeling bad while making an unethical decision doesn't earn points back. Read the scene however you want. The plot does in fact need to end. The Leviathan approaches Pyramid, whose defenses are a little higher than Tripp and Pigsy anticipated. Monkey is able to fight off the mechs boarding, but Pyramid sends out some Scorpion-esque mechs of their own. While not as big, they are clearly newer and more cutting-edge than the Leviathan, which I suppose is a pun per the chainsaw hands. The main cannon manages to take a couple down, but one makes its way aboard, destroying the cannon and generally threatening to demolish everything. It takes all of Monkey's efforts climbing and chipping away at its vulnerabilities to make a dent, but finally, the thing is vulnerable, and Monkey gives the most badass threat anyone has given a robot hundreds of times their size.
I'm gonna finish this. I am gonna finish this. See that gun on its tail? I'm gonna rip it off. Then I'm gonna blow its frickin' brains out.
While he's technically a little clumsier at it than he initially imagined, he is successful. Victory doesn't last long though. Even more of the Scorpions have emerged, and without the main cannon, the Leviathan is virtually defenseless. Pigsy sends Monkey and Tripp out of the blast radius, over Tripp's objections, and puts all of the Leviathan's power into the engines to take out the defenses in one final blaze of glory. The two survivors make their way inside the shockingly advanced pyramid. Countless people, farther than the eye can see, stretch out, and are all synced up by headbands. A withered, half-cyborg old man is operating everything. He's the jump-scare Andy Serkis whose memories Monkey has been seeing through hallucinations of his mask. He has been around since before the war, and is attempting to put things back together in the only way he knows how. He's not enslaving people from his perspective, because he's bringing people here to plug them into a virtual world based on his memories before everything fell apart. It's a Lotus Eater machine, but he thinks it is better to be in a more positive false reality than to face the world as it currently exists. He invites Monkey to put on his mask and see it for himself. Tripp doesn't like it, but Monkey again asks her to trust him and puts it on. We don't get to see what he sees, but we get to see his reaction. He's enraptured with it all. Yet again, Monkey's autonomy is ripped away from him. Tripp begins ripping the life-supporting technology out of the old man, sending the simulation crashing down as he dies. Monkey immediately reverts into protector mode, going over to comfort Tripp, who immediately doubts her decision. Did I do the right thing? As the power goes out in the pyramid, we see the thousands of slaves, confused, come back to the real world, away from their peaceful, false lives. And the game ends. Did she do the right thing? Is it better to force people to face the dreadful truth instead of a comforting lie? I'm not even going to pretend to be able to provide that answer. Exploring the nuances of that question would likely triple or quadruple this video's runtime and still not be able to give a hard confirmation. It's the A word that I keep using, ambiguous, not asshole. It's not an asshole. What I will do is highlight how well Pyramid himself and Tripp are foils to each other. If you ever get irritated by stories where the villain is like, we're not so different, and then the plot ham-fistedly fails to explore that in a meaningful fashion, this is what those should be. Pyramid and Tripp are good foils to each other because of the similar things they're willing to do, but also their vast differences. Pyramid is aiming for a greater good, while also causing so much additional widespread harm. He's clearly got some cognitive dissonance with the fact that his utopia rips apart families and tortures his own victims to death for slight infractions against his goal. Tripp isn't harming people on the same large scale, but she's still harming people. There are lots of deaths in her wake, plus everything she's done to Monkey, plus the question of these thousands who have now lost what they thought was a good life. It's an ending that has lingered with me for a long time, and it's going to keep lingering with me for a long time too. To close things out with my titular premise, my admiration for Enslaved is the exact same place everyone's admiration for The Last of Us comes from. It was perhaps a little ahead of the right time, and it had a few more warts on the experience, but this is a game that deserves to be right in with the same conversations too. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe check out the discussions I've had for other games too. I have dedicated ongoing series for Assassin's Creed and Arkham, and there's an entire playlist of looking back at games on an individual basis like this. I'd certainly love to see you come back for more. I've been uploading stuff on my channel here for nearly a decade now, and I think looking back at games I've known so well for so long gets me a little existential about the passage of time. I have big plans for 2024, and I can't wait to see where everything goes from here.
C'est comment fuck with you if I make... You didn't tell me! You gotta tell me when you're recording, bro.
Keep this up, I'll make this a blooper reel.